Sometimes the smallest amount of money leaves behind the largest debt of character. On a cool autumn evening in Manhattan, the dining room of Blackwood House glowed beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered warm light across polished marble floors and white linen tablecloths. Every table was filled with conversations about investments, acquisitions, and vacations that cost more than most people earned in a year. The quiet sound of silverware touching fine china blended with soft jazz drifting from the grand piano near the entrance. It was the kind of restaurant where every detail was flawless because perfection was expected, never celebrated. Claire Bennett moved through the room with steady confidence, her black apron tied neatly over a crisp white shirt and tailored black uniform. At 27, she had worked enough evening shifts to recognize every unspoken signal guests gave before they realized they needed anything at all. A glass nearing empty, a nervous first date searching for conversation, a tired businessman staring at a menu without reading a single word. She noticed everything, yet she never demanded to be noticed herself. To most customers, she was simply another waitress. Quiet, efficient, forgettable. Claire had learned long ago that people often looked at uniforms before they looked at faces. She no longer took it personally. Across the dining room, Ethan Brooks stepped through the entrance, surrounded by the invisible confidence that followed successful people wherever they went. At 39, the founder of Brooks Capital had become one of New York City's youngest billionaires. His navy suit fit perfectly, his Swiss watch reflected the golden restaurant lights, and his calm expression suggested a man accustomed to hearing the word yes before he even finished speaking. The hostess greeted him by name and escorted him to his favorite corner table overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Employees straightened their posture as he passed. Some admired him. Others feared disappointing him. Ethan barely noticed either reaction. For years he had developed a private habit that almost nobody understood. Whenever he wanted to understand someone, he created a small test. Not because he enjoyed cruelty, at least that was what he told himself, but because he believed money removed every mask people wore. According to Ethan, generosity revealed gratitude, scarcity revealed character, and disappointment revealed true intentions. Every test had confirmed his theory. Until tonight, Claire approached his table carrying a sparkling water and offered a warm professional smile. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks. Welcome back." Ethan acknowledged her with a polite nod before returning his attention to the financial report displayed on his phone. Throughout dinner, Claire provided flawless service without interruption. She anticipated every request before he voiced it, replaced his utensils between courses without drawing attention to herself, and quietly refilled his glass exactly when needed. Ethan noticed her efficiency, but dismissed it as routine professionalism. When the evening ended, Claire placed the leather check presenter beside his coffee cup and wished him a pleasant night. Ethan signed the receipt without hesitation. Then he removed a single $1 bill from his wallet, placed it inside the folder, and paused just long enough to ensure Claire would discover it before he left. As she returned to collect the check, Ethan leaned back in his chair and spoke clearly enough for several nearby tables to hear. $1 should be fair for service like that. Conversation slowed. A woman lowered her wine glass. A server stopped beside the kitchen entrance. Even the pianist hesitated for the briefest moment before continuing the melody. Every eye quietly turned toward Claire. She opened the folder and looked at the lonely bill resting beside the receipt. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Ethan waited confidently. He had seen embarrassment before. Anger. Forced smiles. Awkward gratitude. Every reaction always proved his point. Claire slowly lifted the dollar bill between two fingers and studied it, as though it carried a story instead of a value. Then she looked directly into Ethan's eyes with remarkable calm. There was no resentment, no humiliation, no attempt to defend herself, only quiet confidence. A gentle smile touched the corner of her lips as she carefully placed the dollar back onto the table. The silence inside Blackwood House became so complete that the distant clink of a single coffee spoon echoed through the dining room. Whatever Claire was about to say would change far more than either of them could possibly imagine. Edit. Claire held the $1 bill for another quiet moment before gently setting it back inside the leather folder. Then she looked at Ethan with the same calm expression she had worn since the beginning of the evening. "Sir," she said softly, her voice carrying just far enough for the nearby tables to hear, "I believe you may need this more than I do." No one laughed. No one whispered. The entire dining room seemed suspended between one heartbeat and the next. Ethan stared at her, uncertain whether he had been challenged or thanked. There was no sarcasm hidden in her tone, no anger behind her smile, only a quiet certainty that refused to bend beneath humiliation. Claire gave a small, respectful nod, wished him a pleasant evening, and walked away at the same steady pace she had maintained throughout the night. She did not rush toward the kitchen. She did not glance over her shoulder. She did not wait to see whether anyone approved of what she had just done. She simply continued serving the next table as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Ethan remained seated long after she disappeared into the flow of the dining room. The lonely dollar bill rested beside the signed receipt, suddenly looking much smaller than it had only moments earlier. Across the room, conversations slowly returned, although noticeably quieter than before. A middle-aged couple exchanged thoughtful glances. A young server standing near the coffee station looked toward Claire with quiet admiration. Even the pianist seemed to soften the melody filling the restaurant. Ethan finally stood, buttoned his jacket, and slipped the forgotten dollar into his wallet without fully understanding why. As he walked toward the entrance, the hostess smiled politely. "Have a wonderful evening, Mr. Brooks." He nodded automatically, but his thoughts remained behind at Table 12. Outside, cool Manhattan air greeted him as black sedans rolled past beneath glowing streetlights. His driver opened the rear door, yet Ethan paused before getting inside. Through the restaurant's tall windows, he could still see Claire moving gracefully between tables, smiling warmly at an elderly couple celebrating an anniversary. She poured coffee with the same kindness she had shown every guest all evening. There was no trace of frustration on her face, no lingering disappointment. It was as though his attempt to diminish her had never succeeded. During the drive home, Ethan looked out across the city skyline without noticing the familiar landmarks passing by. His mind replayed the brief exchange again and again. Most people responded emotionally when confronted with public embarrassment. Some argued. Some defended themselves. Others forced a smile, while carrying resentment long after the moment had ended. Claire had done none of those things. She had answered with dignity so natural that it unsettled every assumption he had built over the years. Early the following morning, Brooks Capital awakened with its usual rhythm of elevators, conference calls, and financial reports. Executives hurried through glass hallways carrying tablets while assistants prepared schedules filled months in advance. Ethan entered his corner office overlooking Midtown Manhattan, but instead of opening the acquisition proposal waiting on his desk, he quietly removed the folded $1 bill from his wallet. He placed it beside his morning coffee and studied it for several seconds. Natalie, his executive assistant, entered carrying the day's agenda. "Your first board meeting begins in 20 minutes, she said. Ethan barely looked up. "Natalie," he replied thoughtfully, "I need you to help me learn about someone." She opened her tablet, expecting the name of another investor or competitor. Instead, Ethan glanced once more at the dollar bill before speaking. "Claire Bennett. She works at Blackwood House." Natalie looked mildly surprised but nodded. "Is there something specific you would like to know?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, realizing he had no simple answer. After a long pause, he finally said, "Everything that explains why one waitress was the only person who never failed my test. : What is this?" Natalie returned shortly before noon carrying a slim navy folder instead of her usual tablet. She placed it carefully on Ethan's desk without saying a word, sensing that this request was unlike the countless background reports she had prepared over the years. Ethan opened the folder expecting to discover some hidden explanation that would make the previous evening easier to understand. Perhaps Claire had once managed a company. Perhaps she came from a wealthy family. Perhaps she had simply learned how to answer difficult customers with practiced elegance. Instead, every page made her seem even more ordinary. Claire Bennett, 27 years old, born in Hartford, Connecticut, Bachelor of Arts in English Literature from Fordham University with honors. No scandals, no lawsuits, no social media following. No luxury lifestyle hidden behind carefully edited photographs. She had worked at Blackwood House for nearly 6 years after leaving graduate school to care for her widowed mother during a long recovery from a serious illness. Ethan slowly turned another page. A former professor described Claire as one of the brightest students he had ever taught. Another recommendation praised her patience, humility, and unusual ability to make complicated ideas feel simple. A volunteer coordinator at a neighborhood literacy center wrote that children who struggled with reading often asked specifically for Claire because she never made them feel embarrassed about making mistakes. Ethan stopped reading for a moment and stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan. Nothing in the report explained why she had calmly returned a dollar that had been meant to embarrass her. If anything, the file deepened the mystery. Natalie quietly broke the silence. "There is one thing that stood out to me." Ethan looked up. "What is it?" Everyone described her differently, but they all repeated the same idea. Ethan waited. "They said she has a way of making people feel respected." The sentence lingered in the room long after. Natalie left. Ethan looked down at the folded $1 bill resting beside the folder. For years he had believed that respect was something earned through success, influence, and achievement. Yet according to complete strangers, Claire offered it freely, even to people who had never earned it. That afternoon, a strategy meeting filled the executive conference room with graphs, forecasts, and discussions about a pending acquisition valued at more than $500 million. Executives debated projections, while analysts presented carefully prepared reports. Normally, Ethan noticed every inconsistency before anyone else. Today, his attention drifted. Richard Collins, his longtime business partner, paused halfway through a presentation. "You seem distracted," he observed with a friendly smile. Ethan gave a quiet laugh. "Maybe I am. That is unusual for you." Richard closed his notebook. "What changed?" Ethan hesitated. He could hardly admit that a waitress had occupied his thoughts more than one of the largest negotiations of the year. "I met someone who challenged an assumption I have held for a very long time," he answered. Richard raised an eyebrow, but did not press further. When the meeting ended, Ethan stood alone beside the conference room window watching clouds move slowly across the Manhattan skyline. Success had taught him to analyze numbers, evaluate risk, and predict markets. It had never taught him how to measure quiet character. Before leaving the office that evening, he looked once more at Claire's file, closed it carefully, and slipped the folded dollar back into his wallet. For reasons he still could not explain, the bill no longer reminded him of a waitress. It reminded him of a question that refused to leave his mind. Who was Claire Bennett when no one was watching? There was only one way to find out, and it had nothing to do with another investigation. He would have to see her again, not as a billionaire studying an employee, but as a man trying to understand a standard of dignity he had never learned to recognize before. The following evening, Ethan returned to Blackwood House without announcing himself, without reserving the private dining room he normally preferred, and without bringing a single business associate. For the first time in years, he entered the restaurant hoping not to impress anyone. He simply wanted to observe. The familiar hostess welcomed him with a warm smile and led him to a quiet table overlooking the city lights. A few moments later, Claire approached, her black apron neatly tied, her posture relaxed, her expression exactly as calm as it had been the night before. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks," she said pleasantly. "It is nice to see you again." There was no hesitation in her voice, no trace of resentment, no hint that she remembered the uncomfortable moment involving the $1 bill. Ethan found that more surprising than anything else. "Good evening, Claire," he replied. It was the first time he had addressed her by name. She acknowledged the gesture with a polite smile before offering him the evening specials. Throughout dinner, Ethan watched more than he spoke. He noticed Claire greeting every guest with the same quiet professionalism regardless of how they were dressed or how much they appeared willing to spend. A young couple sharing one entree received the same genuine attention as an executive entertaining international clients over an expensive bottle of wine. An elderly gentleman accidentally dropped his reading glasses beneath the table, and before he could struggle to retrieve them, Claire quietly knelt, picked them up, cleaned the lenses with a fresh cloth, and returned them with a gentle smile that seemed to erase his embarrassment. A little girl celebrating her birthday shyly thanked Claire for bringing dessert, and Claire responded by crouching to the child's eye level, so their conversation felt equal instead of distant. None of those moments lasted longer than a few seconds, yet each carried the same quiet dignity Ethan had witnessed the night before. Halfway through the meal, another server hurried past carrying several plates before accidentally confusing two nearby tables. The mistake was small but obvious. Before the situation could become uncomfortable, Claire calmly stepped beside her colleague, smiled warmly at both parties, and gently corrected the orders without assigning blame or drawing unnecessary attention to the error. Within moments, everyone was smiling again, and the younger server quietly whispered, "Thank you." Claire simply nodded and continued working as though helping others required no recognition. Ethan found himself studying her more carefully than the menu resting beside his plate. Every movement appeared effortless, yet nothing about it felt rehearsed. She never tried to become the center of attention. She simply made everyone around her feel comfortable enough that they forgot to notice her. When Claire returned to refill his sparkling water, Ethan finally spoke. "May I ask you something?" She smiled politely. "Of course." He hesitated for a brief moment. "How do you remain so calm when people are not always kind?" Claire looked thoughtfully at the water flowing into the glass before setting the bottle down. "Because their behavior belongs to them," she answered softly. "My character belongs to me." Ethan remained silent. Claire continued with the same gentle tone. "If I allow someone else's poor choice to decide my own, then I have given away something much more valuable than money." Her words settled quietly between them. There was no lecture, no attempt to prove a point. She spoke with the peaceful confidence of someone describing a truth she had practiced for years rather than one she had just discovered. Before Ethan could respond, Claire excused herself to assist another guest who had simply raised a hand for more coffee. He watched her cross the dining room beneath the warm chandelier light, greeting every table with the same kindness she had shown him despite everything that had happened. Sitting alone beside the window overlooking Manhattan, Ethan slowly realized that the greatest difference between them was not wealth, education, or success. It was that Claire never allowed another person's actions to determine the kind of person she chose to become. The days that followed settled into an unexpected routine. Ethan found himself returning to Blackwood House far more often than his calendar required. At first, he convinced himself it was because the restaurant offered exceptional food and quiet surroundings for thinking after long board meetings. Eventually, even he stopped believing that explanation. He returned because every visit challenged another assumption he had carried for years. Claire never treated him as a billionaire. She never treated him as the man who had tried to embarrass her. She simply treated him as another guest deserving the same patience and respect she offered everyone else. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Ethan arrived between the lunch and dinner rush when the dining room was unusually peaceful. Soft rain traced gentle lines across the tall windows overlooking the street, while only a handful of guests remained inside. Claire welcomed him with her familiar warm smile and guided him to a quiet table near the window. "You seem to prefer this table," she said as she placed a menu before him. Ethan looked toward the rain outside. "It helps me think." Claire nodded. "Sometimes quiet places do that." She left him to review the menu, but Ethan barely glanced at it. Instead, he watched the restaurant move through its ordinary rhythm. A dishwasher quietly delivered polished glasses. The pastry chef carried fresh desserts toward the display case. The hostess patiently helped an elderly couple choose a comfortable table near the entrance. Nothing dramatic happened. Yet somehow everything felt meaningful because Claire moved through every moment with the same steady grace. A few minutes later, a middle-aged man approached the hostess with obvious embarrassment after searching every pocket of his jacket. Ethan could not hear every word, but he understood enough. The gentleman had forgotten his wallet. Before the hostess could become uncomfortable, Claire stepped beside them with a reassuring smile. "Please do not worry," she said kindly. "You have been dining with us for years. We know where to find you." Relief immediately softened the man's face. He thanked her several times before promising to return that afternoon. After he left, Ethan quietly asked, "You trusted him that easily?" Claire poured fresh coffee into his cup before answering. Trust usually begins with someone choosing to offer it first. Ethan looked toward the front door where the gentleman had disappeared into the rain. And if he never comes back? Claire smiled gently. Then he loses something much more valuable than the cost of lunch. Ethan slowly nodded, recognizing the familiar pattern. Once again, she had measured value differently than he would have only a week earlier. Moments later, one of the newest servers accidentally dropped a stack of printed reservation cards across the polished floor. The young woman froze in embarrassment as cards scattered in every direction. Without hesitation, Claire knelt beside her, gathered the cards with calm efficiency, and quietly reorganized them before anyone else could react. Everyone has a first difficult week, she whispered with an encouraging smile. The younger server laughed nervously, thanked her, and returned to work with visible confidence. Ethan noticed that Claire never corrected people in ways that made them feel small. She corrected situations while protecting people's dignity. As lunch came to an end, Claire returned with the check. Ethan reached for his wallet but paused before opening it. "Claire," he asked thoughtfully, "have you always seen people this way?" She considered the question for several seconds. "No," she admitted softly. "Life taught me that everyone is carrying something invisible. Once I understood that, judging people became much harder and showing kindness became much easier." Ethan watched the rain continue falling beyond the window as her words settled quietly into his thoughts. The folded $1 bill remained inside his wallet, only inches away from his hand. It had once represented a test. Now it had become a reminder that the greatest lessons rarely arrived from the loudest voices. More often they appeared quietly, wearing a simple black apron, asking for nothing except the chance to do honest work with dignity. The following Monday morning began with unusual tension inside Brooks Capital. Glass conference rooms filled earlier than normal. Assistants moved quickly between offices carrying revised schedules, and financial analysts gathered around large screens displaying spreadsheets that had been updated several times. Overnight, Ethan arrived just before 8 o'clock, immediately sensing that something was wrong. Natalie met him outside the executive boardroom with a concerned expression. "The Horizon Infrastructure acquisition has encountered an unexpected issue," she explained. Their executives found an inconsistency between two financial projections. They have postponed signing until this afternoon. Ethan accepted the report without speaking. Normally, identifying a discrepancy inside a financial model was routine. Yet after nearly 2 hours of careful review, no one could explain why the supporting documents appeared to contradict each other. Every calculation seemed correct on its own, but together they created uncertainty that threatened months of negotiations. The atmosphere inside the boardroom gradually shifted from confidence to quiet frustration. Senior executives reviewed printed reports while analysts compared formulas line by line. Richard Collins rubbed his forehead and sighed. "Everything balances independently," he said, "but something about the presentation still feels wrong." Ethan studied every page in front of him. Numbers had always spoken clearly to him, yet today they seemed unusually silent. Around noon, realizing that staring longer would not produce better answers, he decided to step away for lunch. Almost without thinking, he instructed his driver to take him to Blackwood House. The familiar restaurant offered a rare kind of quiet that his office no longer could. Claire greeted him with the same composed smile she always wore. "Good afternoon, Mr. Brooks," she said. "You look like someone carrying a heavier briefcase than usual." Ethan smiled faintly. "Today it feels heavier than it actually is." Claire brought him a simple lunch and fresh sparkling water before leaving him alone with several printed financial summaries spread across the table. As she passed by a few minutes later, she noticed Ethan staring at the same page without turning it. "May I ask a question?" she said gently. Ethan nodded. Claire glanced only briefly at the neatly organized papers without attempting to read the confidential information. "When something refuses to make sense," she asked softly, "do you always keep looking at the answer, or do you ever go back to the way the question was organized?" Ethan looked up. "What do you mean?" Claire smiled thoughtfully. "Yesterday, one of our new servers kept delivering meals to the wrong tables. Everyone thought she was confused. She was not. Someone had accidentally shifted every table number by one line on the printed seating chart. She followed the instructions perfectly. The instructions were simply organized incorrectly. Ethan remained perfectly still. Her words echoed quietly inside his thoughts. Not the answer. The structure. Not the calculations. The organization. Without another word, he reached for a clean paper napkin and quickly sketched the layout of the financial summary from memory. Suddenly, one possibility appeared that no one on his team had considered. What if the underlying calculations were correct, but one supporting schedule had been copied from an earlier draft before the final revisions were inserted? Ethan folded the napkin, stood immediately, and looked at Claire with genuine gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. Claire looked slightly surprised. "For lunch." He smiled for the first time that day. "For reminding me where to look." She simply wished him a productive afternoon without asking another question. Less than an hour later, Ethan returned to Brooks Capital and gathered his analysts around the original working files instead of the polished presentation. Within minutes, one junior analyst quietly raised her hand. "I found it," she said. One reference table was imported from an outdated draft after the formatting changed. The calculations are accurate. Only the supporting layout created the appearance of conflicting assumptions. A wave of relief spread across the room. Richard looked toward Ethan in disbelief. "How did you know where to begin?" Ethan glanced briefly toward the Manhattan skyline beyond the conference room windows before answering with a small smile. "Someone reminded me that the smallest details often decide the biggest outcomes." By late afternoon, the corrected financial model had been verified 3 separate times. Every supporting schedule matched the underlying calculations. Every discrepancy had disappeared, and the Horizon infrastructure executives returned to the conference room with renewed confidence. The atmosphere that had felt uncertain only hours earlier slowly transformed into one of quiet optimism. After a final review, both companies exchanged firm handshakes across the polished conference table. Pens touched paper. Signatures were completed. Months of preparation finally became a successful agreement worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Applause filled the room as executives congratulated one another. Richard Collins smiled broadly and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I have worked beside you for more than a decade," he said. "I still do not understand how you find solutions that the rest of us overlook." Ethan looked around the conference room before answering. Analysts were gathering documents. Attorneys were organizing signed contracts. Assistants quietly collected presentation materials. Every person had contributed to the success in front of them. "I did not find it alone," Ethan replied honestly. Richard tilted his head with curiosity. "Then who deserves the credit?" Ethan smiled gently, but chose not to reveal Claire's name. "Someone reminded me that before searching harder, it is sometimes wiser to look differently." Richard accepted the answer even though it raised more questions than it resolved. That evening, Brooks Capital hosted a private dinner to celebrate the acquisition. Crystal glasses reflected the lights of Midtown Manhattan, while executives toasted another milestone in the company's history. Yet despite the elegant surroundings and sincere congratulations, Ethan found his thoughts drifting back to Blackwood House. He remembered the quiet confidence in Claire's voice. He remembered the simple story about the seating chart. Most of all, he remembered how naturally she shared wisdom without expecting recognition afterward. Across the city, Claire finished another evening shift exactly as she had finished countless others before. She helped the newest server organize tomorrow's reservation book, thanked the kitchen staff before they left, and carefully packed untouched bread from the dining room, so it could be donated the following morning according to the restaurant's usual practice. Her manager noticed her carrying the neatly wrapped bags toward the storage area. "You never forget that job," he said with a warm smile. Claire laughed softly. "Neither does anyone else. You could let someone else handle it once in a while." She shook her head gently. "Kindness works best when everyone believes it belongs to someone else. I would rather simply keep doing it." Her manager smiled without replying. He had stopped trying to understand Claire years ago. He simply appreciated having her on the team. Later that night, Ethan stood alone inside his penthouse overlooking the glowing skyline. The city below continued moving with endless energy while his apartment remained perfectly still. He opened the top drawer of his desk and placed 2 items side by side. The folded $1 bill rested beside the paper napkin on which he had sketched the corrected financial layout earlier that afternoon. One reminded him of the moment he had mistaken wealth for worth. The other reminded him that wisdom often arrived dressed in the simplest form imaginable. Neither object possessed meaningful financial value. Yet together they represented the most important lesson he had learned in years. He realized that every success throughout his career had taught him how to build companies, negotiate contracts, and multiply investments. Claire had quietly taught him something entirely different. She had shown him that the ability to respect another person's dignity before knowing their title was a form of wealth that could never appear on a balance sheet. Standing beside the window with Manhattan stretching endlessly beneath the evening sky, Ethan understood that the acquisition completed that afternoon might become another successful chapter in Brooks Capital's history. The lesson waiting inside his wallet would remain with him for the rest of his life. 3 evenings later, Ethan returned to Blackwood House, carrying something that felt strangely unfamiliar in his hands. It was not a merger proposal, an investment portfolio, or a confidential contract. Inside a simple cream-colored envelope rested a handwritten letter and a cashier's check made out to Claire Bennett. The amount was substantial enough to change someone's life, yet Ethan already suspected that money alone could not repair what pride had damaged. As he stepped into the restaurant, the familiar warmth of polished wood, crystal chandeliers, and quiet piano music welcomed him once again. Claire noticed him almost immediately and approached with the same calm smile she had offered every time he had walked through those doors. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks," she said. "It is nice to see you again." Ethan smiled in return, though this time there was something noticeably different in his expression. The confidence that had once bordered on certainty had softened into quiet humility. During dinner, he barely touched his meal. His attention remained on the cream-colored envelope resting beside his plate. Several times he reached toward it before pulling his hand away again. He had negotiated billion-dollar agreements without hesitation, yet speaking honestly to one waitress suddenly seemed more difficult than facing an entire board of directors. When Claire returned with the check at the end of the evening, Ethan slowly stood. Nearby conversations faded as several guests instinctively glanced toward the table, recognizing the well-known businessman. Ethan took a steady breath before speaking. "Claire, I owe you an apology." She remained silent, giving him her complete attention without making him feel rushed. Ethan continued quietly. "The night I left that $1 tip, I believed I understood people. I thought I was measuring character." He paused briefly before looking directly into her eyes. "Instead, I revealed my own." Claire listened without interruption. There was no satisfaction in her expression, only patient kindness. Ethan offered her the envelope with both hands. "Inside is a letter, and something I hope you will accept as my gratitude for everything you have taught me, even when you never intended to teach me anything." Claire accepted the envelope respectfully and opened it. She read the handwritten letter slowly, allowing every sentence to settle before turning to the cashier's check tucked behind the final page. She looked at it for several quiet moments before carefully sliding it back into the envelope. Then she gently returned the envelope to Ethan. He blinked in surprise. "Please," he said softly. "You deserve this." Claire smiled with genuine warmth. "Your letter is a gift," she answered. "Your honesty is a gift. Those I will gladly keep in my memory." She lightly touched the envelope. "But I cannot keep this." Ethan frowned. "Why not?" Claire folded her hands peacefully in front of her apron. "Because kindness loses something when it becomes a transaction." Ethan remained silent. Claire continued gently. "You do not owe me a reward. You only owe the next person the respect you wished you had shown me." Her words settled over the table with remarkable simplicity. There was no accusation hidden inside them. No attempt to make him feel guilty. Only an invitation to become the person he now wanted to be. Ethan slowly accepted the envelope back into his hands. For the first time in many years, returning money did not feel like failure. It felt like understanding. Claire thanked him sincerely for dining at Blackwood House and wished him a pleasant evening exactly as she had done every visit before. She then turned to greet another family entering the restaurant, offering them the same warm smile, the same steady voice, and the same quiet dignity she had offered everyone else. Ethan watched her walk away beneath the soft chandelier light and realized that some people changed lives without seeking attention, without asking for recognition, and without ever leaving the place where the world expected them to remain ordinary. That quiet realization became more valuable to him than any investment he had ever made. Several months passed, and the changes that began with one quiet evening inside Blackwood House continued spreading in ways neither Claire nor Ethan could have predicted. Brooks Capital remained one of the most respected investment firms in New York City, but employees slowly noticed something different about the man leading it. Ethan still demanded excellence, still expected preparation, still made difficult decisions when necessary, yet the way he treated people had changed in countless small moments. He greeted the security officers by name every morning. He thanked the custodial staff before leaving the office each evening. Junior analysts who once hesitated to share new ideas now found themselves invited into conversations that had previously belonged only to senior executives. Meetings became places where thoughtful questions mattered more than impressive titles. No company announcement explained the transformation. It simply became part of the culture people experienced every day. One autumn afternoon, Brooks Capital announced a scholarship program designed for students who had interrupted their education to care for family members during difficult seasons of life. During the press conference, reporters asked Ethan what had inspired the initiative. He smiled thoughtfully before answering. Some of the strongest people never receive recognition because they quietly choose responsibility over personal ambition. We should never assume that a person's current job tells us the whole story. He offered no further explanation. There was no mention of names, no attempt to create publicity around a private lesson. Across the city, Claire continued living exactly as she always had. She still arrived before the restaurant opened, tied her black apron neatly each morning, checked every table twice, greeted every guest with sincere warmth, and left each evening only after making certain the dining room was ready for another day. New employees admired her patience. Regular customers appreciated the calm welcome that never changed. Her manager often joked that if the restaurant ever lost Claire, it would somehow lose part of its heart as well. One cool evening, Ethan returned once again for dinner. This visit felt different because nothing needed to be repaired, explained, or forgiven. It was simply another meal served by people who respected one another. Claire welcomed him with the same warm smile she had offered from the very beginning. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks," she said. "Your usual table?" Ethan nodded with an easy smile. "If it is available." As she led him across the dining room, a young businessman entering behind him hurried past the hostess without making eye contact. Ethan paused, turned gently toward the young man, and smiled. "Her name is Emily," he said kindly. "She welcomes every guest before they even sit down." The young man looked slightly embarrassed before smiling warmly at the hostess and thanking her by name. Emily's surprised expression softened into genuine appreciation. Claire noticed the exchange from several feet away, but said nothing. She simply continued walking, knowing that some lessons became most powerful when passed quietly from one person to another. At the end of the evening, Ethan signed the receipt, left a generous gratuity without drawing attention to it, and placed nothing else on the table except a simple handwritten note. After he departed, Claire unfolded the small card. It contained only one sentence. "Thank you for reminding me that respect should always arrive before judgment." She smiled gently, folded the note, and slipped it into her apron pocket before preparing another table for arriving guests. Outside, Manhattan continued shining beneath the evening sky, filled with people rushing toward meetings, opportunities, and ambitions of every kind. Inside Blackwood House, life remained beautifully ordinary. The $1 bill stayed safely inside Ethan's desk drawer, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a quiet reminder of the evening he discovered that the greatest measure of a person is never found in the money they leave behind. It is found in the dignity they choose to protect, the respect they choose to offer, and the kindness they continue to give long after no one is watching.